I'm ready. Let's go. Good. George Washington, Thomas Edison, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Abraham Lincoln, Hillary Clinton, Michael Jordan, Neil Armstrong, Harriet Tubman, Dwight Eisenhower. When you hear those names, what do you think of? From politicians to inventors, athletes, to pioneers for social change. These are some of the most influential people in our nation's history. We all have somebody that comes to mind when we think of our favorite or most important person in American history. So who's yours? Why am I a credible source to talk about history with you? When I first enrolled at St. Clair, I was a history major because it's been my passion my entire life. And over the last couple of years, commuting 2 hours every day from Vandalia to Hamilton, I've read over 25 books on American history through the Audible app, making use of my time on the road and learning a great deal in the process. So when you look up scholarly lists of the most influential Americans in history, you see many of the names that we just talked about. And even though they're all very deserving, Ben Franklin is usually left out of the top 10, and in some cases behind folks like Elvis Presley. I'm going to show you why Ben Franklin is the most influential American we have ever seen, and why Franklin is more than just a $100 bill. During a vulnerable time in our country's infancy, Ben Franklin stands alone as the leading figure who fought harder than anyone else to combat the inhumane and barbaric institution of slavery, educate a nation through public learning, found civil institutions still operating to this day, and invent numerous items that we all use in modern times. A Western Michigan.edu article lists Elvis Presley above Ben Franklin of the most influential Americans in history. Yeah, you heard that right, Elvis. But Franklin changed the course of history for the betterment of all people. And according to benfranklinhistory.org, Franklin founded numerous organizations, institutions, including first of their kind firefighting clubs, academies, hospitals, libraries, and the first ever insurance companies. He also signed all three major documents that created the United States, according to pbs.org/Ben Franklin. Elvis's impact and influence can somewhat be seen in our society, but it's not even close in comparison to those of Franklin over the last 320 years. Franklin's impact on our country is also seen in his dedication to educate the common people of this country. In 1731, he founded the country's first public library, to which he wrote of in his autobiography. On page 56 of that writing, Franklin states the impact of his newly found library system, stating that the common farmer and tradesmen were now as intelligent as most gentlemen, and this most likely led to the colony's stand to defend their privileges and led to the Revolution. Many things we take for granted today, we expect, were brought to life years ago by Franklin. Abraham Lincoln, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, they're regularly listed as the #1 most influential American we've ever seen. But these men were flawed in many ways that Franklin was not. Take this time to consider why Franklin needs to be #1 on these lists. He fought and was successful in abolishing slavery in 1780, making Pennsylvania the first state to do so, according to Library of Congress.gov Resource Guide to Franklin. The article goes on to show us that Franklin petitioned Congress in 1790 to abolish slavery throughout the country, 83 years before Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. Franklin was years ahead of his time, doing so when the likes of George Washington and Thomas Jefferson still owned human beings as property. Franklin was trying to earn them their freedom. I would argue that if Franklin's voice had been heard, we could have avoided the Civil War. Lincoln wouldn't have been shot. He probably would have served a normal presidency, and 3 generations of people in bondage would have been freed if the federal government would have listened to Franklin 83 years prior. Folks, Ben Franklin is more than just a $100 bill. So we've very clearly seen why Franklin deserves to be considered the most influential American. His impact on our country can also be seen in his dedication to improve the day-to-day lives of all people. Not only did he start the first public library in the country, Franklin created the country's first fire department in 1736, according to benfranklinhistory.org. At a time when a small house fire would quickly turn blocks into ashes, Franklin seen a need and filled it for the betterment of all people. These civil projects were the models around the world and are still in use to this day. Also, Franklin's poor eyesight later in life led to his invention of bifocals. And according to Neil Handley of the College of Optometrists, 25% of all people will need bifocals as they age through life. Imagine that, 25% of 7 billion people today wearing Franklin's invention. That's astonishing. We can see that with Franklin at the top of our most influential American list. We can be proud to have a man who fought for racial injustice in a time when that was unheard of, whose inventions are used by billions of people to this day, and whose civil projects are still putting out fires, lending books, and healing sick people around the world. Ben Franklin is more than just a $100 bill. So we can do this. Together, we can change the narrative that historians want us to see, and we can give credit to the right people. And that person is Ben Franklin. With Franklin considered the most influential American in our history, we can be proud of someone who spoke up for what was right, who had a vision to stop entire streets from burning down from fires, a man who wanted to educate a population who had little access to books and learning. The most influential person our country's ever seen, Benjamin Franklin, helped generations of Americans see better. He educated his people to the point they demanded change and revolution, and he gave us, to this day, a better quality of life. With him at the top of any list you see in the textbooks and in and out of our own thinking, we changed the narrative of the greatest American to a man who truly shaped our country in so many ways that his impact is seen in so many angles, even to this day around the globe. So when you think of the list of the names that we read off earlier, and all the people who have accomplished monumental things, consider this. All of those people were known for being great in one area. Ben Franklin helped shape the course of our country, the world, and our current everyday lives in so many ways, as we have seen. He is truly the most influential person this country has ever seen. So I call on you, whenever asked, surveyed, or you help your kids out with a project, put Ben Franklin at the top of the list where he belongs. Thank you.